I've just made an alarming discovery about this car. It hasn't got any cup holders. How am I going to spill coffee over myself? Ugh. Not that long ago, actually in living memory and barely even really 20 years ago, it was possible in Europe to go and buy a full-size luxury saloon, not from one of the big premium manufacturers either, but you know, a proper working man's car, if you like. And I'm not talking about the big plutocratic express machines, things like the 7 Series, the S-Class, the lower spec Maybachs and, you know, the cheaper end of the Rolls-Royce spectrum. But, you know, Fords and Vauxhalls, like this, 1999, Vauxhall Omega. The Omega name lived in Europe from 1986 to 2003, and here in the UK from 1994, where that previous generation was known as the Carlton, obviously. With the demise of the Rover 800, when the 600 and 800 were amalgamated into the 75, the Ford Scorpio, well, the last one was not a glittering success really, was it? That whole sector seemed to die away in the terms of non-premium cars. It just left things like the Jag XJ, the 5 Series and the E-Class. And in 2003, very sadly, this wasn't replaced. But it does leave us with something beautiful to look at today, so let's take a look around. This is one of the very last of the Series 1 cars, so 2 generations of this kind of Omega. This is the B1 and the B2, which obviously followed it. You can tell the difference if you're a real Omega spotter, mostly by looking at this grille. On the B1s, it's separate from the bonnet. On the B2, the grille goes with it when you lift it up. Took me a while to figure that one out. Now the styling of this is actually rather sleek, isn't it? It's actually an evolution of the global GM, Opel, Vauxhall project to improve aerodynamics and fuel efficiency. It's an evolution of the previous generation of Carlton / Omega, which had also been quite sleek and quite rounded. This just takes the whole thing one step further in a bigger body shell. And it is big, isn't it? I mean, if you park in a small parking bay, you're going to struggle to open the doors. It's very much a full-size car, to the point that in America it was sold as a Cadillac Catara, or Catara? I don't know, someone tell me that. Okay, admittedly, it was not the most well-regarded of Cadillacs, but it was still a Cadillac in America, where they're big. Now this is a CDX model, which means it's the absolute top of the line in terms of kit and equipment, but all Omegas did come with great levels of kit because it was a luxury car. But this one, as a CDX, has got sunroof, fog lights, alloy wheels, a boot, lights, tyres. It's got stuff, we'll come to that in a minute. Oh. Now that is a luxury car thump, and from a Vauxhall as well. I'm going to keep on calling it a Vauxhall even though it is a rebadged Opel. They're built in a factory in I can't pronounce this, Rüsselsheim in Germany. So it's kind of a German car with a British badge, but you know, they're developed globally, so what does it matter where it comes from? I'm going to call it Vauxhall though, because it's got a griffin on the steering wheel. It's a Luton car as far as I'm concerned. Now, this is a massive step up from the Vauxhall Corsa you learned to drive in. This feels sumptuous. There is wood of a sort everywhere. There is velour on the door cards, nice little courtesy parking lights in the side of the door so you can see the puddles as you're stepping out in the dark. Being a 90s car, not everything is integrated to a massive screen. There is a small screen. It's a very, very young iteration, of an early evolution of what will become the standard thing to have on the dashboard. That's your little trip computer, about that kind of size. Here's a picture in the background. But on the center console, which is actually incredibly wide, you have all of your heating and ventilation controls, air conditioning, and below that you've got a range of 9 buttons. Everything from your hazard warning lights, tyre warning, and heated seats. Of course you've got heated seats. You look at the radio and think, oh, it's only got a cassette player in a car of this standard. Don't be fooled. It's got a 6-disc changer in the boot, obviously. It shares its gearbox with other GM products, that Saab included, and this button on the top and the snowflake button looks incredibly similar for use in sport and winter. The seats are very wide. I'm guessing it's designed for wide people. Are they wide in that part of Germany? I don't know. Because I feel a little bit lost in here, to be honest. The velour is beautifully soft and smooth. It's very, very nice indeed to be in. Although, even though it's comfortable, it's typical of Vauxhalls in that it's still quite a hard seat. You expect more softness. If you climb into a Rover 800, you kind of sink into the squishy seat. This, you kind of move a tiny bit and then you're stopped. But it's not uncomfortable. I could live with this. If you're familiar with Saab 9.5s, as I am now, you'll be familiar with a number of switchgear components. For example, the electric mirror switch over here definitely looks very familiar. And the dials for the lights and dashboard dimmer look remarkably similar to a Saab 900 heated seat control. I wonder if they've repurposed that. Although most of these cars would have been owner-driver type arrangements rather than chauffeur-driven, I'm sure a few of them were, and the back of this car is as luxurious as the front. If anything, it's a little more comfortable as these seats are a bit more squishy and a bit nicer, but you still have the same velour, big speakers, bits of wood, that kind of stuff, and plenty of headroom in the back as well. And as it's potentially going to be a family car, the back seats fold down as well. I do rather like the seat storage bins, which aren't just a bit of elasticated stuff. It's a solid piece of plastic on elasticy bits that hangs back. So if you've got small flat things you need to keep in there, they will stay small and flat. Well, there's a lot going on in here. There's not much ground to engine ratio when you look through here. I can just about make out a tiny sliver of tarmac or brickwork below, I think, an exhaust manifold and some kind of coolant pipe. Yeah, a lot of engine in this engine bay. This is a 2.5 litre V6 making 166 horsepower and 167 foot-pound of torque. And of course, no review would be complete without looking in the boot, or trunk if it was an American Cadillac version of this, but it's not, it's British, it's a boot. It's big, basically, is all I'm going to say. It's a very big boot. Lots of space. You could go, I can't actually reach the back of it. What more do you need to know? It's big. And one thing which is pushing this car from retro to borderline old is the fact that the boot closing strap is just that. It's a strap, not an integrated handle, which means it's not new, but it's not quite retro either. Anyway, let's go and take it for a drive. Now that is a marvellous sound. I think if I owned this car, I would be sitting in the driveway just turning it off and on again and revving it occasionally most of my time. Now I have to thank my friend Jason for the loan of this car. You may remember Jason from the Rover 214 videos where he was slightly larger than the car he owned at the time. He has now traded that car for this much more size suitable vehicle, which is very, very Jason. It's the Jace-mobile, I think we can call it quite happily. Incidentally, the Rover 200, the 214, he actually sold it on to Alan, the guy who fitted the gearbox, who really took a shine to it. But Alan has had an unfortunate too many cars incident where he now has that plus his Vauxhall Cavalier plus about 3 Saabs and something else and nowhere to put them all. Right, let's get this car into its natural environment, which is a dual carriageway. Now not only does that sound awesome, the pickup is excellent. Now I'm going to have to risk putting the aircon on and making noise of wind from the car, not from me, obviously. If you're familiar with this part of the world, you'll know this is one of the worst roundabouts to get away from in England, especially when you're on camera and can't do anything naughty. And the owner's sat in the back seat. Well, that took us to 40 miles an hour as we crossed the roundabout, which is the speed limit here, the posted limit, I should add. It's not bad get up. I'm going to try that again in sport mode later. It's very smooth. It's typically automatic in style in that it launches after a slight delay and then it kind of just goes with a surge of torque rather than horsepower, which is also a V6 thing as well, really. And this old 4-speed auto just keeps it burbling around 2,000 to 3,000 revs, which is quite nice. This engine definitely feels more at home cruising rather than revving like crazy. This car comes with dual zone climate in it, which is a lovely thing to have. So I've got both sides set to low because it's sort of 20 something and humid today. Unfortunately, this aircon does need regassing, so I'm actually sweating quite badly at the moment. It is a very comfortable ride. It's quite firm, but at the same time, it still glides relatively well over the bumps. Yeah, the pickup is actually quite impressive. And that noise just, it's wonderful. I keep on wanting to rev it, even though it's a relatively slow speed limit around here. You just want to hold it in a second gear and hear the engine a lot. Now we're heading into some country lanes to see it, and it's maybe slightly out of its natural habitat in a small twisting back road. Now that's a nice Land Rover. Hello. We approve of that a lot.
Now, this car we're following appears to just run a red light in front of us. Ironically, 20 years ago, these were used by an awful lot of police cars, and if he had done that, and this was the plainclothes car it was almost destined to be, this guy would be in a lot of trouble right now. A few forces didn't take the Omega because, especially in 3 litre form, it did have a few overheating issues, and after a fast run it would have like a bubbling radiator and maybe have blown a hose. So I think Kent police were considering it but changed their mind in the end. Interestingly, they were considering a full V8 version of this car using the Chevy LS, the LS1 I think, but they dropped the idea in the end for exactly that reason. They feared that people mainly in Germany but visiting from all across Europe would take it down the autobahn and have it running full throttle for long periods of time and basically overheat it and melt the engine down. So they abandoned that plan for that reason, which is a shame because it would have been a really, really nice car. However, later on, the Holden Monaro, which was that mad Australian, basically supercar, was imported to the UK and sold as a Vauxhall, and that had a Chevy LS engine in it. So ultimately, that plan did come to fruition, just not in the format they originally planned.
The steering is really, really light. It's for such a big car. Shouldn't really be a surprise considering that it's a luxury vehicle, so it's designed to be driven with ease. You know, not going to raise a sweat driving this thing. But yeah, the controls are all very light. The accelerator takes a bit of a shove to get it going, but it's not too bad at all, really. And the brakes are just so powerful. You could put yourself through the windscreen if you really wanted to. I would demonstrate, but I'd probably lose all the GoPros off the side of the car. I was talking about police cars a minute ago, wasn't I? Yeah, so although they're not ubiquitous as being a police car, they actually were quite popular. And if you watch any kind of popular TV and film from the late 90s, early noughties, you will see them on screen, so all liveried up as patrol cars and pursuit cars. If you watch things like the movie Hot Fuzz, The World Is Not Enough, Hetty Wainthrope Investigates, you will see them on screen. It's a real shame that these days the rise of the SUV, which was kind of embryonic back then, so things like Range Rovers and posh Land Cruisers were kind of creeping into that kind of territory of the, should we call it the blue collar area of executive travel? So rather than buying a Ford or a Vauxhall, someone will go and buy a posh 4x4. If you were actually after a fast, expensive saloon, you would still probably go and buy the BM or the Jaguar or maybe even the Audi A8. But at this end of the market, it just died a death. And so, very sadly, this is the end of an era. Something of a dinosaur, but a rather wonderful dinosaur. And so, the values of big old luxury saloons have always fallen rapidly because, you know, if you're buying a car which is basically a status symbol, you want the latest and greatest in order to prove your status. So a used big exec saloon has always been something of a bargain, but being a non-premium brand, that meant the values of these things, as wonderful as they are, fell even more sharply, and that can't have helped with the business case for keeping these on the books and building more of them. So sadly, the last one of these you'll buy will be from 2003. In fact, the last one ever was built was a silver 3.2 litre V6 on 25th of June 2003, after they built about 797,000 of them worldwide. After the facelift, they didn't change much on the car. The trim, the lights, the bonnet grille was slightly changed, but they added a couple more engines. There's a 2.6 and 3.2 litre V6 giving a bit more power. Incredibly, there was a 114 horsepower 4-cylinder version you could buy of this. I'm not sure I would have done though. When this car was finally killed off, there was no direct replacement. Instead, they used things like the higher-end Vectras and that largely forgotten Vauxhall Signum, which is a 4-seater version of the Vectra, which no one remembers and no one bought. The problem was that obviously this was a high-end executive luxury car, and so it felt like one. And the Vectra that replaced it, even though it was a newer chassis, just never felt special and wasn't really all that good. So in comparison, this was a better car, even if it was a decade older. everything from the weight of the steering to the way the doors shut just feel quality, as opposed to the poor old Vectra, which just felt cheap. Thank you for watching this. I really hope you've enjoyed this little adventure in a very nice, last of its kind dinosaur of a car, which I wish would come back and replace those horrible SUVs everyone seems to buy now. If you've enjoyed this, please hit like and please hit subscribe if you haven't already. There's a little circle in the bottom corner down there. You can hit that and be told if there's more stuff coming your way. See you next time.